Hello and welcome to the CDW's Tech Talks. This is the podcast where we dig into technology trends, practical insights that shape how organizations use technology to solve real business problems. I'm your host for today's episode, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. Each episode, we like to break down a topic in the world of business IT. We like to show you how to leverage those concepts in your organization. So stick around until the end of the episode for our tech tip of the week, a simple, actionable takeaway that you can add to your ever-changing mental model. Today, I'm joined by Jodey Hogeland from Dell. He's the PowerStore Global Evangelist. Hey, Jodey, can you tell me a little bit about you and your role and how you ended up where you're at with Dell?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you, man. So my name's Jodey Hogeland. I'm the Global Evangelist for Dell Technologies PowerStore. I've been with the company about 11 years. I joined the company from another storage vendor and came over to join the all-flash business unit for a startup at the time called Extreme.io. And then, eventually, through those ranks, pre-sales architect, moving into a global CTO role, field CTO role. And then from there, got tapped to join the product management and engineering staff in preparation for the launch of PowerStore. So Dell PowerStore has been to market since May 5th of 2020. So we're coming up on the 6-year birthday of the product. But I came over to the product and engineering side at Dell in 2019 in preparation for the launch and was tasked with evangelizing the product, having deep dive technical conversations globally for the capabilities and making sure everyone understood our strategy, the capabilities, and where we were taking that product into the future.
It's kind of neat to be there, early and see things change over time too. How was that? And it's good also to know that there's life after being a field CTO.
Yeah.
How have you seen the, really sort of the product develop, just over, at a high level kind of throughout the years? Because there's been a lot of changes we'll talk in the industry.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that's interesting from my lens and where I sit, because I have been a customer. In fact, I've been a customer. I've been a sales rep. I've been in pre-sales. I've been in product and engineering. So I've seen through a lot of different lenses. Working towards accomplishing the same goal. And I kind of liken this to, I fly a lot because I am a global asset. I'm a global resource. And if there's one thing that I really wish I could do is sit in a room with, an aeronautical engineer who's designing aircraft and have a really straightforward conversation with them on why the seats are the way they are. That would be a fun conversation. But it's kind of the same way on the storage side. When you start to see how things come together and get put together, it's a very interesting, dynamic. And I think one of the pieces, particularly with PowerStore, what's been an interesting aspect of the journey is to be part of the conversation even 11 years ago, where this was a whiteboard theory. The original architect at the time was a guy named Dan Cummins. And we were having conversations around what would be the potential if we took an enterprise class storage array and built its primary data path on containers. And we know what is happening with containers in the worlds of applications today and how that's gained a lot of momentum over the past decade. But it was really us looking at that and saying, what would happen if we took enterprise class storage and built, that foundation on containers? And so being part of those early conversations, seeing that technology come to fruition, seeing how the product development staff and the engineering staff and then input from the field and input from customers all comes together to make something very, very creative and innovative happen. It's been a really fun ride.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, when we think about containers being sort of ubiquitous across all the different IT infrastructures, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on premises, deploying your Docker and your Kubernetes workloads. It's interesting also to see that there was that foresight early on to recognize that baking that into the foundation of the product could be pretty interesting. And the other part is kind of, you mentioned perspective. I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day, and she was talking about how her perspective has changed, and it's I think what's really key is you've got that perspective and you got the experience. You've sort of sat in all of those different seats. You've had all those different hats on, however you want to say it, and it does give you sort of a 360 perspective of, what the product is and how you can relate that. So I'm excited to kind of get into, talking about some of the insights that we prepped for because I think you've got a good, good grasp of that. So let's kind of jump into it. First concept we talked about when we talk about how we got here was kind of this idea of the deletion dilemma. Jody, you've seen the industry go from, hey, can we delete some of this data because our storage is really costly and we're trying to find ways to optimize, to we can't afford to delete anything because we're so uncertain that the value of that data might be worth more in an AI world than it was, when I was just trying to cut down my operational expenses. How has that shift in data changed the way that you advise clients when they're looking at their foundational storage?
Yeah, that is a challenge that I think a lot of people are facing, particularly, infinite retention means you got to figure out infinite budget, right? So it's a bit of a bit of a catch 22 there of trying to figure out, hey, I need to retain everything, but that means I got to have a lot of money, but I don't have a lot of money, but I got to retain everything, right? And so you kind of get caught in this loop. So talking with customers and advising them on the realities of looking at the data and then trying to understand what does need to be maintained,
Hmm.
because there are some things that absolutely do, and the reality is there are things that do not, and it's up to the business and their particular business. Because every business vertical is different. Oil and gas is much different than healthcare, and healthcare is much different than tech, right? And so there's a lot of different nuances to data sets that have to be taken into consideration. But one thing that is common is, we went from the days of, when I was an administrator, my boss, the CIO coming to me and saying, you know, hey, figure out what we're going to delete, right?
Hmm.
To now people say, no, we're not going to delete anything. To now we're kind of back into, okay, we still got to kind of figure out what to delete, because even when you look at artificial intelligence, if you're looking at learning models, whether they be small language models, large language models, if there are application integration aspects of those technologies for artificial intelligence as well. One thing that customers have to be cognizant of is poisoning the well. So not all data needs to be part of that analysis, or needs to be part of the training model, or needs to be part of the output model. So there are things that you have to take into consideration to look at, isolate, segregate, and then say, hey, you know what, this data, maybe we don't need after a period of time, if that's test data, reiteration data, rerun data, etc.
I find it likens to me a little bit when we're trying to go from like disaster recovery to business continuity, and IT a lot of times struggles because we need investment and time from the business, and at the end of the day, IT may be the steward of that data, but they're not the necessarily the people that understand all of the data, and so I think that's kind of this weird conundrum where IT is responsible a lot of times for the cost of that data. But identifying what you can, really delete becomes a bit of a challenge there.
Yeah, I think we have realistically, for the past 15, maybe arguably 20 years, um, IT has been trying to make this shift of IT is not a cost center, it's an asset
Yeah.
kind of, right? And it's still kind of a continual fight, because IT, realistically, in modern day, IT is what drives a business. Being able to make those strategic investments, understanding the technology, being able to outperform or outplay your competitors in your market segment with technology, and getting ahead of where the industry is going, and being ready for when those trends come, so that you can get ahead of your competition as a business entity. But those things are looked at, from a business perspective, as a cost. But to your point, IT doesn't necessarily fully understand what the executive leadership team in a boardroom is sitting, trying to make strategic directional decisions for the company, and understanding what data is pertinent and what data is not. So, I just spent 2.5 weeks in Southeast Asia, and I met with in three distinct cities. I sat at a table with 23 executives, CIOs, CTO, and CISOs. And the perspective of them, and this was a fireside chat, kind of a roundtable conversation. And what was very interesting was their perspective of the CIO, CTO, CISO in modern day is much different than it was even 5 years ago, where they were just tasked with managing an IT environment and making sure that the lights were on and everything was secure. Now they are much more part of the strategic directional conversation. So I think we are starting to see that shift and that trend where companies are realizing that their senior executive staff for IT infrastructure, in particular, inclusive of the CISOs, the security officers, they are playing a much greater part and getting now a much better understanding of that data set. So I think we're going to see that shift, trend to the positive in the future.
Yeah, and that's a big hurdle to get over. And I think that in, sort of medium enterprise and especially in Canada, um, we're starting to see some of the changes around whether it's AI or business transformation, almost requiring IT needs not only to be a value provider as opposed to sort of a cost center, but also in a lot of ways it's getting them a seat at the table, which I think is really really critical, especially early in those conversations. So, all right, we're going to pause the podcast here for today. The conversation with Jodey Hogeland from Dell Technologies was a great one. Went over time a little bit, and so rather than try and squeeze it into a single episode, we're going to break it into two. So we will catch you in the second.